Hi, amazing OCD community. I am Katie O'Dunn, one of your lead advocates for the IOCDF. Often you see me talking about all things faith and OCD and what it looks like to be a minister who's really open about having OCD, a faith leader who's really open about having OCD. But I love really talking about all things OCD with y'all and advocacy and recovery and what that means and looks like. So I'm happy to jump on for just a few minutes today to answer some of the questions that you've asked either before or during live streams that we haven't gotten to answer quite yet, because we always want to get to your questions and answer them and hope that you feel seen and really heard in the experiences and the things that you are navigating. So I'm going to dive right in. The first question is, should we leave it up to our uncertainty and accept it, or assert our values and instill confidence? Is that considered a compulsion? So I think sometimes we see this as really black and white, right? Like we often do with OCD, where we feel like, okay, by sitting with it, by accepting that uncertainty, I can't have confidence or hope. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think both of these things can fit together, and they really have in my life. Yes, we can accept uncertainty. We can say, yep, you know what? That bad, scary thing might happen. I'm not sure. I'm going to live my life anyway. But we can also have confidence in ourselves, in our treatment, in the things meaningful to us. I often talk about radical faith, and I think that can be a component as well, where we're leaning into the uncertainty, but we're also having trust that the world is friendly. So for instance, I navigate a lot of things related to harm and related to moral scrupulosity. I can say, yep, maybe all the bad, scary things are going to happen. Maybe I am secretly this dangerous person. But at the same time, I can have confidence and faith that I'm probably not. You know what? I don't know for sure, but probably not. And I'm going to continue to lean in with faith and with confidence in myself, in my treatment, in the things most important to me. I think where that becomes compulsive is if you're saying that over and over again, and if you're looking for certainty around it. But it's possible to not have certainty, right? To accept that uncertainty, but also have this radical faith and this radical hope. Next question says, I have real event OCD. I never hear this theme discussed. Does ERP still work for this type of OCD? So yes. We actually recently did a town hall on real event and false memory OCD. So please go back and check that one out. We had some really great conversations on there with John Hirschfield, and it was a great conversation. But anyway, yeah, real event OCD is when your OCD is fixated on something that has actually taken place or has actually happened, and you have a difficult time letting that go because your OCD is saying, well, this really did happen. And what if it means something? Often we're making something larger out of it morally than maybe what others would in a similar situation. And yes, ERP still works. OCD is going to say that ERP doesn't work in this situation, right? OCD is going to say, well, this is different because this is based on something that's true or something that actually happened. Yeah, no, that's not the case. We're still responding to the event in a way based on our OCD, based on our anxiety, latching onto it, giving it more significance or importance than maybe we should. And by engaging in ERP, it's really about saying, you know what? It may or may not have that meaning that I'm placing on it at this moment. I'm willing to let that go. In my case, with moral scrupulosity and real event stuff, yeah, I'm willing to risk that I might have had bad intentions in that moment, or I might have done something negative, and it might mean something about me. But you know what? I'm going to continue to move forward with my life anyway. Especially with this one, again, OCD always tells me, well, this is different, but it's not. We can still continue to move forward with evidence-based treatment because OCD is always going to tell us that it's different. And the next question actually is, how do you let go of real event OCD? Same with anything else related to OCD, right? It's not as much about saying like, all right, I'm never going to think about it again. It's about accepting the thought and accepting that even if it's a real event kind of thing that you're obsessing about, a thought is just a thought is just a thought. And that can seem really tough. I know for me, I fixate on times where I might have been imperfect or where there was some sort of moral ambiguity, and letting it go, or letting go of that real event OCD, is really more about letting the thought be there, but not continuing to engage with it or to figure it out, using the skills and tools from ERP to say, yep, it may or may not mean something, but I'm going to continue to move towards my values and towards my life anyway. Okay, next one. After tackling all of the items on your hierarchy list, is it unusual to need ongoing counseling? This is a really great question. And just like a lot of things, I think it looks different for every single person. Often, someone will kind of move through their treatment and they'll move through their hierarchy. And I know in my particular case, my therapist was like, okay, like it's time for you to go off and do it on your own and show yourself that you can do that. So I took a period where I was really living into that treatment on my own, because she didn't necessarily want me to seek that reassurance of her being there as a part of that process. But later on, I jumped back into therapy, not because really of needing to go back to the hierarchy component, but just living my life with OCD as something that it just, things that come up every day, and continuing to live a lifestyle of exposure and uncertainty. And I think for a long time, I grappled with this idea of, okay, I've gone through my treatment. Do I still need therapy? And I've realized for me, it's actually just really helpful to continue to see a therapist and have someone supporting me each and every week to make sure that I'm not falling back into unhealthy patterns. But again, I'm living that lifestyle of exposure and uncertainty. So it's not something that's unusual. It's different for each person. Sometimes there will be kind of a break after treatment. Sometimes folks might take a while before engaging in therapy. Sometimes you might continue right on with therapy. And I would encourage you to talk to your provider about what's the most healthy for you. But there's never any shame in that. It's actually really helpful for me to still be accountable to someone, even as I work in OCD and faith and kind of process what I'm navigating in my own life. Okay, do you bring up the more taboo topics right away with someone when sharing your story? Yeah, great question. So I know we talked about this actually the other night a little bit, with kind of the stigma and sharing your story town hall. And, I think when I first started sharing my short story, I felt like I needed to. I felt like I needed to share everything all at once immediately. And I actually think that was kind of compulsive for me, of feeling like I needed to do that in order to be honest. When in reality, you can share whatever it is that you choose to share. You can choose to share whatever is significant and whatever is actually comfortable for you. So I don't think you need to necessarily bring up those taboo pieces right away, unless you want to, unless you feel comfortable. It can be different in different scenarios. I know for me, I pick and choose. There are some times that I share kind of the more taboo and harm subjects related to my OCD, particularly at the conference and particularly at IOCDF events. But if I'm talking to someone where I'm doing an interview and teaching them about OCD for the first time, I might be a little bit more general. I kind of gauge the situation and my comfort level. And I think the biggest thing for you is to recognize that there's no right or wrong way to share your story. You don't have to share everything all at once. And I think for me, being mindful of who I'm sharing with has been really helpful in terms of figuring out, well, how do I want to share? How do I want my story to be retold, maybe by others who know or who don't know about OCD? But there's never, never, never any pressure to share every single thought that you have. But I would also just encourage you to, think about the context in which you're doing that, because then there are also situations where for me, it's been really healing to share about my intrusive thoughts and taboo themes with folks who understand OCD. So I think it depends situationally and where you are. Okay, how do I cope with health OCD? I can't tell what is real and what is my OCD. Yeah. So OCD loves to make it feel like that thing it's attached to is actually real. And especially with health components, that can happen pretty easily, because you might be saying, well, I really am feeling this particular thing, or COVID really is real, or I really could have this diagnosis again. But really, you can tie this into any theme where, yes, anything is possible, right? But with the health OCD piece, we talk about this actually a lot in our household, Ethan and I. We talk a lot about the fact that generally, if there's something that's an actual issue or if something's really an issue, you are going to handle it immediately. And if you're asking the question, is this OCD or is it not OCD? Generally, we should choose to treat that as OCD. So, for an example, if I was out for my run today and I don't know what I'm thinking, fell down in like a crazy way and I have a limb kind of hanging off. Sorry, that's graphic. I probably wouldn't ask, like, is this OCD? Is this not? Or should I go and seek medical attention? I would probably seek medical attention, right? But if I come back and I'm like, I think there might have been this thing. Is there something that's going on? Is it possible that I'm sick, right? If you're asking the question as someone with OCD, often I think it's a good idea to treat it as OCD if you're saying, is this OCD or is it not? Another really good rule is to think about what would someone else do in that situation who doesn't have OCD. Is this something that they would be addressing immediately or is it not? Where is the urgency there? What is the function of addressing it in that particular moment? At the same time, I know that can be so tough and feel so real and so scary and really, really hard to parse out. So I also just want you to know that you are not alone in that struggle of trying to figure out, well, is this real? Is this a real concern or is this OCD? Okay. Next question. I am wondering if OCD can distort your intentions about a past memory and make it feel like you actually did something for that terrible but plausible reason. I even remember what I was thinking and how I felt, so I don't know if I'm just in denial of my intentions in the past. I've dealt with false memories in the past, but now I remember things that have happened, and I think my intentions were in a really bad place. It always goes along with my moral scrupulosity theme, but it's very plausible to have happened. So this goes back to a little bit of what we were talking about earlier with Real Event OCD. And I know it pulled, whoops, knocking over things here, pulled in that false memory piece as well. False memories, that's definitely was a big one for me alongside harm. And when we say false memory, we're not actually talking about memories. It's kind of the term that a lot of folks in the OCD community use for OCD about the past when you're questioning, well, did this thing actually happen? Did this really scary thing happen? For me, it was, did I harm someone and forget? And then the more I would try to figure it out, the more it would seem real, the more it would seem like, well, I can't remember not doing it. So does that mean that I did do it? And then I would try to think about not doing it. And then I would be able to see in my, all the things. And then it starts to feel real. This is just another form of OCD, and it can be really hard to let it go, but you can use your skills and your tools to say, you know what, I don't know, maybe not. I'm never going to know for sure. But again, leaning into that radical faith that, you know what, it's probably just my OCD. I don't know, but I'm going to use my skills and tools from ERP to say maybe, to accept the uncertainty and to continue to move towards those things important to me. Now, the questions that you're asking around, well, if this may be something that really happened, and saying, did I do that for a bad reason? Who knows? I think I did. I think I didn't. I've been there too with real event components. And one of the biggest and best pieces of advice that I received was that you can only know really what your intention is now. You can't know what your intention was in the past. We always feel like we do. We try to figure out, well, why did I do that? What did that look like? But I think there's also this element of trust of, wherever you were, whatever you were navigating, you were doing the best that you could in that moment. And it might not have been perfect. We all make mistakes. We are all imperfect. I definitely make lots of mistakes and I'm really hard on myself about it, but I'm working on that self-compassion. But I think you can give yourself compassion that you did the best that you could in that moment. And you know what? Who knows if the intentions were good or bad? But all you can control is how you move forward now. And the fact is that you're giving attention to something in the past, as opposed to being in the present right now and making a difference. choosing your values and making a difference in the world and in your life and in the lives of those around you. And that is the urgent need in this moment, the one that's in the present, not in the past. Because OCD is always going to latch onto stuff in the future and in the past. But the ironic thing is the only place we can actually exist is in the present, the place that OCD doesn't necessarily focus. Okay, next question. It is really hard for me to grasp that I have a mental disorder. How do people come to grasp it and have it not define them? Yeah. So this one was really, really tough for me. And I think a lot of folks with OCD, I might be biased, but I think folks with OCD are some of the kindest, smartest, most creative, funny, wonderful humans, and are often doing these other just really brilliant things in their life. And for me, I was kind of at my sickest working in school chaplaincy in a really prominent role. And it didn't make sense to me. Well, how could I be doing all of these big things and have an illness where my brain is tricking me? I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And I think I was stigmatizing myself in some sense, where for a while it was like I would almost rather, sounds strange, but would almost rather the thoughts be true than accept that I had a mental disorder or accept that my brain could trick itself in that way. But I think for me, accepting it was beginning to recognize that I have OCD and there is no shame about that, right? It's something that's going on in my brain, but it's also in a way physical, the same way there would be a physical disorder that we would recognize. We would never shame someone for having cancer or for having diabetes, right? It's something that we can't control. We can't control having OCD, but here's the really cool thing. We can control how we respond to it. And I started to realize that a diagnosis for me was actually really a gift because it gave me the opportunity not to get rid of having OCD, but to change how I was responding to the thoughts that were popping up and the thoughts that were getting stuck. And that was really how I could get back to my life. I think for me, I'm at a point now, and I would encourage you to think about what this looks like for you, where OCD doesn't define me, in part because I recognize and approach every day acknowledging that I have OCD. And yeah, there are days that are harder sometimes, right? But being able to acknowledge that I have an OCD diagnosis maybe changes how I approach those days, changes how I approach the thoughts, and actually gives me permission to live that life that I was created to live, that life that's not defined by the OCD, the life that OCD just happens to be in the backseat along for the ride, but not driving the car, when we're able to recognize and accept that, yeah, that's a part of our life, but it doesn't have to define us. The next one says, I'm so impressed by all of the advocates speaking on OCD today. Do any of you ever worry about people at your job or school finding out that you speak about mental health, or speak out about mental health? Yeah, so I was in that camp for a really, really long time. Again, have mentioned, was in school chaplaincy in a prominent role, and was very fearful that the thousands of families that I was working with would find out about my OCD and judge me for having OCD. So I kept that a secret for a very long time. I was really surprised, actually, in a personal sense, when I did start coming out about my story, which started very small. It was the opposite of everything that I thought. It actually gave others permission in my community to share their story too. So rather than judging me and focusing on that aspect, it was more like folks were saying, oh, wait, now we have permission to share too. But it definitely was a fear for me. And I am sure, there have been struggles with it too, right? And I know a lot of our advocates have had both experiences, good and bad. I think for me and for many of our advocates, the good has by far outweighed the bad. But I think it's really up to you and how you want to share and how you want to advocate. I think for every person that looks different, and it's okay if right now you don't feel comfortable being open about that because of where you're working or because of your school or your job, whatever that looks like. I think knowing that community and their level of acceptance is also significant. And we have some advocates that started off pretty anonymous, right? Where they were doing advocacy, but under a different name, and that's okay too. And I really started in that way when I was really struggling. But I think on a personal note, I eventually got to the point where, and this is even feels weird and kind of hard to say, but I didn't want to be in a space that didn't accept me for the authentic person that I am. And that includes mental health advocacy. So I think it took away some of that fear for me, because it was like, you know what? Okay, if they don't accept me for doing this, that isn't the place that I fit into. But that's when it became a much larger, I think, part of my life in advocacy. And so I think, there is that fear and there's that push and pull. And I would encourage you to think for you, is your community open and accepting? Is this something that you want to be doing? Is that something you want to do in a public way or a more private way? There are no right or wrong answers to those questions. And we have this awesome advocate team here that if you want to talk about specific stuff that you're navigating with that, I know we would be more than happy to answer more questions about that too, with our own journeys and with the journey that you're on. Okay. Any motivating things I can tell myself as I'm doing exposures to help motivate me to push through with the exposures? So yeah, there's a both and here. I always tell folks, sometimes things like mantras can become compulsive. I used to be the person that would have a new mantra every week when I was struggling on my mirror and think, this is the one that's going to fix everything. And it was more about this general life of uncertainty, right? And living into that. But at the same time, one of the biggest motivating pieces, I'll say two things. One for me has been, as I'm doing exposures, actually considering something that I don't currently have in my life, or something that's really important to me that I want to be able to be present in, that I can't currently be present in, and thinking tangibly about the fact that every time I engage in an exposure and don't respond compulsively, I'm stepping towards that and I'm stepping away from my OCD. And there's something tangible about that. If I'm stepping towards this value, I'm stepping towards being present. For me, it was always my mom who's navigating cancer. It was, well, I can make the choice to step towards time with her as opposed to being in my head with my OCD. Another piece that was really significant for me is this idea, and this was a big turning point. So my fiance, Ethan Smith, shared this with me, this idea that, he at one point said, I would rather all of the scary stuff come true than continue to give up my life to OCD. And that was a big turning point for me, of actually saying, you know what, reclaiming my life is worth it. I am willing to risk all of this stuff my OCD says coming true. It's probably OCD, but I'm willing to risk it for even a chance to move towards this life that I was created to live, this life doing all of these amazing things with the people that I love and the people that I care about. Because we know what happens if we continue to engage in compulsions. There's actually a lot of beautiful uncertainty and not engaging in compulsions, and doing our exposures and doing the response prevention, and in moving forward in a different way. That's really our pathway to life. Okay, so a couple faith and OCD questions too. Why does it feel like it's my faith when it's really my OCD? Yeah, great question. So OCD is very much something that will latch on to anything that is significant or important to you, particularly for folks in their faith traditions. It isn't something that's unique to a particular faith tradition. I work with folks who are Jewish and Christian and Muslim and Buddhist and Sikh and Jain, who navigate OCD, and atheist and agnostic and humanist, right? It's going to latch on to whatever's important to you. And just like all the questions I've answered today, it's always going to feel real. So if your intrusive thought relates to, what if I sinned against God? Or what if I committed the unpardonable sin? What if I prayed improperly? What if I didn't perform puja correctly? Whatever that looks like in your tradition, it's going to feel unique and real to you, because it's going to be about the things that are the most significant to you. Here's the good news. It's really not. Religious scrupulosity isn't a faith issue. It's an OCD issue that can still be tackled with exposure and response prevention, no matter what OCD says and no matter how real it feels. So then this actually fits with the next question. Does ERP oppose faith? And no, I mean, it really doesn't, especially, if you're working with an OCD specialist, they're not going to ask you to do anything that's going to be in opposition to your faith tradition. they're definitely going to ask you to do things that are uncomfortable, right? But I always tell folks, in all of the faith traditions that I see folks in, God is seen, or the divine is seen as all powerful and all loving and all good. And you know what? I always say God can handle your exposures. God can handle these tough exposures that you're doing or that you're engaging in, because ERP isn't attacking your faith. It's not opposing your faith. It's actually opposing the OCD and breaking down the areas that OCD is masking as faith so that you can get back to your faith in a way that's meaningful and in a way that's value driven. And that's a pretty beautiful thing, right? It's by doing the ERP, by doing the scary stuff, that we can actually start to engage in our faith in these big, beautiful, awesome ways. And I know personally, and for a lot of folks I've worked with, faith is increased through ERP by accepting the uncertainty, by breaking down the OCD. It's like we can be healthy in a healthier place with our faith than maybe we even were before. And then finally, do I need to stop praying as a part of my treatment? Can I pray in a way not dictated by the OCD? So I always tell folks, we definitely through treatment aren't going to have you ask for certainty through prayers. But I never want to encourage someone to stop engaging in a practice that's meaningful or significant or value driven for them. So I think there are ways to definitely pray in ways that are authentic, but aren't dictated by the OCD. So for instance, if I'm working with someone who has been using prayer compulsively to ask for the thoughts to get taken away, we might shift that to say, dear God, please help me to sit with this anxiety. Please help me to allow the thoughts to be there while I trust and have faith and continue to move through treatment. We might say, you know what, it's really hard right now, but please give me the strength to do that. That's a value-driven prayer, asking for strength while accepting uncertainty. So I definitely think there are a lot of ways to do this, to think about, well, how can I not do this compulsively, right? But still engage in it in a way that's meaningful and value-driven and helps me move towards the things that are important to me as a part of my treatment. So I hope this was helpful. I tried to tackle a lot of questions for y'all today that we haven't gotten to yet. And I just want to close by saying y'all are amazing. And it is such an honor to get to advocate alongside each of you, because you're all advocating in your own ways as you share your stories, as you engage with the IOCDF, as you do all of the amazing things you're doing. And you deserve to get better. You deserve to live the big, beautiful life you were created to live. And I know OCD is hard, right? Like OCD can totally suck. And I get that. And I've been there. And there are still stuck points for me, right? But I do want you to know that treatment can make it so OCD is no longer driving the car, and that you really can do all of those value-driven things that you were meant to do. I used to not believe folks when they said that to me. I'd say, yeah, mine's different. But I want you to hear that it's not, and that you are not alone, and that there is so much hope. So thanks, y'all. Have a beautiful day.